The Despicable Case of Ted Bundy. A charismatic and seemingly ordinary individual, Bundy's twisted double life sent shockwaves through society in the 1970s. If there wasn't proof of his actions, no one would believe his deeds possible.
We have reason to believe that he's a maniac.
I don't accept the whole situation.
Sentence Ted Bundy to die in the
Deep in the night of January 14th, 1978, close to the Chi Omega sorority house in Florida State University, Tallahassee, Florida, Ted Bundy stood watching. Like any other Saturday, the sorority girls returned from their social events, completely unaware of the monster nearby. Ted Bundy, who escaped prison, arrived in Tallahassee on the 8th of January, living off of stolen groceries and women's credit cards. By 2 a.m. on the 15th of January, he picked up a log of wood and entered the sorority house's back door, which he had broken days earlier. He silently crept into the bedroom of a 21-year-old Margaret Bowman. He bludgeoned her unconscious with the log, making sure she wouldn't wake up anyone else, and raped her. He choked her to death with a white stocking, using the log to crack open her head. That's not all. He went to the next room, where he bludgeoned 20-year-old Lisa Levy. This time, he did not rape his victim, but he tore off her nipples with his teeth, biting her buttocks before inserting a spray bottle into her vagina and throttling her with his hands. Next, he went into Kathy Kleiner's room, hitting her over the head. The sound had woken up her roommate, Karen Chandler. He ran over to her and hit her several times in the head with the same log. At exactly 2:15 a.m., Neda Neary had come into the house through the back door, making Bundy flee through the front door. Thinking it was a burglar, she quickly called the police. Not long after, they realized the horror of that night was more than just a simple case of burglary. The paramedics were called in. Margaret Bowman was carried away in a body bag. Lisa Levy was hospitalized but soon passed away. Kathy Kleiner was checked by a paramedic. Her head was soaked with blood. Karen Chandler was carried away on a stretcher, and she was in critical condition. Ted had run away on foot just 8 blocks away and watched from a distance, hoping to go back to finish up what he started. He went to the house of 21-year-old Cheryl Thomas, a dance major. He tore off her clothes, severely broke her jaw, dislocated her shoulder, and raped her. Her injuries left her permanently deaf with brain damage that affected her balance, ending her dancing career. Childhood. Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell on the 24th of November, 1946, to 22-year-old Louise Cowell, an unwed mother with a runaway father. He was raised by his grandparents, believing his mother was his sister. Apart from his physically abusive bipolar and agoraphobic grandfather, Samuel Cowell, he had a relatively stable upbringing. Ted Bundy was born a congenital psychopath. He could feel no feelings, remorse, or empathy for other people. Growing up, he had a fascination with violence. Louise's sister had once woken up surrounded by knives, with a smiling 3-year-old Bundy staring at her. In 1950, Louise legally adopted her son and relocated to Tacoma, Washington, where she married Johnny Bundy, who adopted Ted Bundy, lying that he was his real father. Louise had 4 more children with him. Despite believing they were related, he never liked his family. Growing up, Ted Bundy stayed away from people. He was two-faced, with a narcissistic personality and an inflated self-worth. He would often talk about accomplishments that did not exist. He had a fragile ego, but was filled with a sense of self-loathing because he did not meet up with his delusions of grandeur. He was also bipolar. He would have a long burst of activity that would often be followed by dark periods of lethargy. He had little understanding of social cues or friendships. He was bullied because he was thought to be shy, which worsened his self-loathing, making him create a false sense of superiority. He believed he was the most athletic, intelligent, and popular, as well as the class president. In reality, he had average grades, did not enjoy reading or writing, and was not athletic, apart from occasional skiing. In 1961, he found his birth certificate, and the truth about his birth destroyed his sense of self-worth. Although he was a loner and a virgin till his early adulthood, he became fascinated with sex. He would peep into women's houses, watching them undress and steal pornography. He was particularly drawn to BDSM, degrading and painful positions, novels with sexual violence, and pictures of beaten, disfigured, and dead women. By the age of 14, not feeling empathy had fully developed him into a sexual sadist. By the age of 14 through 18, to aid his behaviors, he changed his personality. He was tall and somewhat handsome. He learned to be confident, soft-spoken, and charismatic. He became fairly popular with girls, but did not date or have sex. He delved into petty crimes, like breaking into houses, stealing cars, getting drunk, and stalking women. Despite all these, he graduated high school in 1965 with a clean, juvenile record. Immediately after graduating high school, he enrolled at the University of Puget Sound, private liberal arts college in Tacoma, Washington, for 1 year. What he initially studied there is unknown, but he would then transfer to the University of Washington, where he would go on to study the Chinese language. For a while, he worked as an unskilled laborer in restaurants and stores, but that didn't last long as he resented authority over him. While working as a bag boy in Seattle, a basement apartment rented by 20-year-old Lisa Wick and Lonnie Trumbull was broken into. They were beaten and raped. Lonnie died, and Lisa had brain damage and memory loss, but she claimed it was Bundy. Before that, on August 31st, 1961, the parents of an 8-year-old girl who was abducted claimed they saw Ted lurking around that day. Both crimes have been linked to Bundy, but never were officially confirmed. Years later, Bundy wanted to go into politics, and studying Chinese would not cut it. He realized he needed to study something like law or business administration.
I believe that what I did is newsworthy, and my part in the campaign was so insignificant, I'm embarrassed that I should be getting this publicity from it. Really embarrassed.
In 1967, he was smitten by Diane Edwards, who was beautiful, nicely dressed, and from a wealthy family in California. She was his ticket to high society. He soon began working his charms, and they soon started dating. He used her to feel good about himself, but this soon turned into feelings of insecurity as he couldn't meet up with her expectations. He had big plans, but no patience to follow through with them, so he took a break from university, working menial jobs while volunteering in politics, which did not impress Diane. He was involved in Nelson Rockefeller's unsuccessful campaign. A few months into their relationship, Diane graduated soon after his return and began working in San Francisco, and she soon dumped him. He was forced into a realization that he wasn't going to be a future president like he thought. He was a college dropout, working odd jobs. Without Diane, he lost his sense of self-worth, fell into alcohol abuse, and soon began showing suicidal tendencies. He hated Diane and began planning his revenge. All his victims would look like Diane Edwards. In late 1968 and early 1969, he went to Philadelphia, spending one semester at Temple University, where he confirmed he was indeed an illegitimate child, pushing him off the edge. On May 30th, 1968, Susan Davies and Elizabeth Perry disappeared. Their bodies were found days later, sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. Ted would later confess to killing women in that area by faking wearing a cast and pretending to need help. In Seattle, 1969, Liz Cleffer, a submissive 23-year-old single mother who worked as a secretary, fell for Bundy. They had begun dating. In truth, he believed he was out of her league, but he found her useful. Along with her 3-year-old daughter Molly, who was unaware Liz was being molested by Ted, they had formed a family unit. Liz hoped she could convince him to marry her. In 1970, he resumed studying at the University of Washington, studying psychology as his major. But he still longed to be someone important. Ironically, he volunteered in the Seattle Suicide Hotline Committee to prevent sexual violence against women, and he co-authored a pamphlet on rape prevention. His likability, confidence, and charisma led him into Republican politics. He also saved a drowning 3-year-old boy, which hailed him as a hero. Through all of this, Diane was still in his head. July 19, 1974, he broke into the house of Rita Curran in Vermont, not so far from where he was born. He raped her and strangled her to death. July 22, 1971, in Seattle, he abducted and killed 21-year-old Joyce LePage. A man of the people by day, a monster by night. Bundy served as a campaign volunteer for Daniel J. Evans. He spied on Robert Rossellini, but was caught and made the newspaper. This gained him popularity, useful contacts, and reputation, especially since Evans won the election. Trail of death grows longer. In 1973, he applied to law school at the University of Utah. This was confusing for most because he could be chosen to run for political office if he stayed longer in Seattle. He claimed he needed a scenery change, but in reality, his low scores wouldn't gain admission into more prestigious schools. In Oregon, on June 29, 1973, 17-year-old Rita Jolly, and on August 20, 1973, 24-year-old Vicki Lynn both went missing, and both ladies were never found. He confessed to killing the 2 women in Oregon. In the summer of 1973, he became active in politics, going to several states on political trips. He linked up with Diane Edwards after finding out she was single. He was a budding law student with a political career, making him impressive to Diane. Over the next 6 months, they rekindled their romance. She fell in love with marriage in her mind. He proposed to Diane in late 1973 while he was still dating Liz. January 1974, he grew cold and distant toward Diane before dumping her harshly. His 5-year-long revenge was complete. He proved he was worthy of her and discarded her. January 4th, 1974, he broke into the bedroom of Karen Sparks in Washington, bludgeoning her with a metal rod. From her bed frame, he inserted the rod into her vagina, rupturing her reproductive organs, causing her internal bleeding, and entering her lower digestive tract. After 10 days in a coma in the hospital, she was left permanently, physically, and mentally disabled for the rest of her life. On one night of January, 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy was bludgeoned unconscious and kidnapped, forced to strip, raped, and murdered. Her decapitated head, which he shampooed and applied makeup to and committed necrophilic acts to, was found in Taylor Mountain, where Bundy had often gone hiking. On March 12th, 19-year-old Donna Manson was abducted and killed by Ted Bundy. He would later confess to incinerating her skull in his girlfriend's fireplace and dumping her headless body on Taylor Mountain. Just a month later, 17-year-old Susan Rancount was abducted by Ted Bundy while using a fake arm sling. Her skull was found on Taylor Mountain. Just 3 nights earlier, students reported being approached by a man in a tan Volkswagen. On May 1974, in Oregon, 21-year-old Roberta Kathy Parks was abducted and killed by Ted Bundy. He would mock the fact that her remains were picked up by animals. On June 1st, 22-year-old Brenda Ball was killed. Her skull was found in Taylor Mountain. 11th of June, 18-year-old Georgia Hawkins was abducted by Bundy, pretending to be in a fake leg cast. He hit her over the head with a crowbar, handcuffed, raped, and strangled her to death. Only her femur and vertebrae were found after wildlife got to her body. In July 1974, Sandra Weaver was murdered. Her body was found in Grand Junction, Colorado. Investigation. Within 6 months, disappearances in different states had caught the radar of the police. The bodies popping in different places with the same MO aroused even more suspicion, considering that a Volkswagen was seen in most scenes. The police across state lines decided to work together and share information on the same case. The case was indeed harder, considering a lot of Volkswagens were used during those days. Fear began to spread into the minds of people. The cries were being linked to the satanic cult and the Zodiac Killer. On July 4th, Ted Bundy visited Lake Samarish. Using a fake arm sling and a British accent, he lured 23-year-old Janice Ott and 19-year-old Denise Naslund. He forced Denise to watch him rape and strangle Janice before raping and killing her too. At this point, an investigation was launched because of the presence of eyewitnesses, but there was no definite evidence of proof. A handsome, friendly man in a white Volkswagen who called himself Ted was all they had. It was hard to determine if that was his name or just a fake name, but they drew out a sketch. Liz Kleffler would eventually recognize Ted from the sketch and the description that the police broadcasted. He had told her he was going to Lake Samarish skiing, and he was being secretive in the middle of the night. She informed the police that Ted had fit the description, but after a background check, they realized he had no juvenile record and was well connected to politics, so he was crossed off the list of suspects, much to the disappointment of Liz. For the following months, he would kill various more women, including a female hitchhiker in Idaho, 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox in Salt Lake City, 17-year-old Melissa Smith, and 17-year-old Laura Aim. He would perform gruesome acts on them, including bludgeoning, abducting, sodomizing, strangulation, beating, raping, and necrophilic acts with the dead body. This included shampooing decapitated heads and putting makeup on them. On the evening of November 8, 1974, 18-year-old Carol DeRanche was lured by Ted Bundy, who pretended to be a police officer. He would drive her to a remote location and threaten her with a gun, but fail at handcuffing her, ending with her escaping. She would immediately report to the police. Bundy would kidnap and kill 17-year-old Deborah Kent. Years later, nothing was found of her body except her kneecaps.
Police believe the key was from the same handcuffs used to kidnap Carol DeRanche. 4 hours earlier, the same night, Debbie Kent disappeared.
Ted Bundy was getting sloppy. During his altercation with Deborah Kent, there was an eyewitness who described a similar handcuff to the one used on Carol DeRanche. The description that was put out by the police once again matched Liz Cleffler's boyfriend. She called the police again, and this time his photo was put in a lineup, but the witnesses in Lake Samarish could not recognize him. Regardless, Ted Bundy was again put on the list of suspects. Running out of luck. Ted went on his killing spree. The timing between his next kills would grow less and less after each kill. He would once again commit horrific acts on Karen Campen in Florida. His victims, 26-year-old Julie Cunningham, 25-year-old Denise Oliverson, 18-year-old Susie Cooley, 12-year-old Lynette Culver, 15-year-old Susan Curtis, 24-year-old Shelley Robertson, and Nancy Baird. Away from all his crimes, Ted Bundy was building a separate life and floated around the idea of marriage to Liz Cleffler while cheating on her with several other women, including Carol Ann Boone. In August of 1975, he joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, improving his image with plans to run for governor, senator, or maybe even the U.S. president. Meanwhile, Bundy kept climbing up the ever-shrinking suspect list. On the 16th of August, 1975, around 2 a.m., while looking for victims, Bob Hayward, a patrol officer, had stopped Ted Bundy for driving erratically. He was arrested after trying to flee. With no clue about his identity, he was arrested on suspicion of burglary because of the things found in his car, which included a crowbar, pantyhose with eyes cut out, a handcuff, a skiing mask, an ice pick, rope, and a garbage bag. During custody, the kidnapping of Carol DeRanch was brought up because in his car was a pamphlet of the ski resort with a checkmark where Karen Campbell was kidnapped, and a pamphlet of a play in the school where Deborah Kent was abducted. The handcuffs in his possession were also the same make used on Carol DeRanch and Deborah Kent. He was held on bail pending investigation, but was soon released due to inadequate information. Police officers soon went down to visit his girlfriend Liz for anything that could help with the investigation. Conversations with her would lead to the police discovering his unhealthy fascination with BDSM and how often he went out at night. Liz narrated to them how, one time, she found him awake in the middle of the night, examining her body with a flashlight. Some suspicious things found included plaster, crutches, a hatchet despite never chopping firewood, a meat cleaver, disposable surgical gloves, a heavy lug wrench, as well as women's clothes and jewelry. Investigators also found Diane and soon saw her resemblance with the missing ladies. Realizing that investigators were onto him, he attempted to cover up his tracks by selling his car to a teenager to conceal evidence. His plans were discovered and his car was impounded and searched. Hair belonging to Carol DeRanch, Karen Campen, and Melissa Smith, a police chief's daughter killed on the 6th of October, was found in it. First trial. On the 2nd of October, Carol was called to identify her kidnapper in court. During the kidnapping, Ted had worn his hair long and shaggy, but by this time, he had cut his hair short. He was still identified as the kidnapper by Carol. An eyewitness also identified him as the man around the auditorium when Kent was kidnapped. There was no strong footing to charge him because there was no body found for Kent and no evidence, so he was only discharged with attempting kidnapping. His bail was set for $15,000, $80,000 in today's money, which his mother paid, believing her son was innocent. Members from his church staged protests at city events to proclaim his innocence, saying he was harmless. This trial fueled his delusions of self-confidence and narcissism to an all-time high. He vowed to prove his innocence, clear his name, finish law school, and become a good lawyer.
Yes, I intend to complete my legal education and become a lawyer and be a damn good lawyer. And I have a great model over here, so...
Ted Bundy knew nothing of his charges piling up until he would be backed up into a corner. Ted then left Utah and went back to Seattle to stay with Liz. He spent the whole of Christmas preparing for Durant's trial. In early February 1976, based on his future confessions, he abducted and killed Debbie Smith. One time during his trial, when he was asked if he had seen Carol before, he smirked, saying no. The defense probed Carol, but she stood her ground. She pointed Bundy out to the judge, which made him angry as he stood up in a rage, calling her a liar. The 4-day trial ended with him being convicted of kidnapping and assault. He was sent to Utah prison for psychological evaluation, which would decide if he was to be put out on probation or sent to jail. Psychiatrists described him as a danger to society and advised against probation. June 1976, he was sentenced to 1 to 15 years and was excommunicated from the Mormon Church immediately after the judgment. While serving his sentence, Ted was put in solitary confinement. He had been caught with road maps, airline schedules, and a social security card. It seemed he was planning to escape. Just months later, he was charged with the murder of Karen Campbell. The brochure in his apartment put him around her apartment. An eyewitness also saw him in the apartment elevator. Furthermore, the dent found in her skull matched his crowbar. At this point, he realized his crimes were closing in on him, making him fight against extradition to Colorado because he was scared of the death penalty. He joined his defense team for his trial. His defense lawyers described him as egocentric, vapid, and devoid of content. He was self-indulging towards the interviews and smiling and proclaiming his innocence. Ted Bundy was in his defense, so he wasn't shackled or cuffed. On June 7, 1977, while in Pitkin County Courthouse for a preliminary hearing under the pretext of research, he jumped off a second-story building down 25 feet. He sprained his ankle during the attempt, but managed to run towards Aspen Mountain.
As I understand it, the defendant was in the courtroom, and the guard was at the door, and the last time he looked, the defendant was there, and the next time he looked, he was gone.
He spent the next days in the wilderness wandering around, stealing food before being arrested and brought back to prison. Even with his escape, his chance of getting free was still high, but it was ruined by his second escape. On the night of December 30th, 1977, he cut a hole in the ceiling, crawled into a jail guard compartment, stole clothes, and walked out the front door.
And found his food uneaten. He looked over and Bundy appeared to be in his cot, asleep. He finds nothing but a pile of books where Ted should have been.
He was immediately put on the FBI's most wanted list. He spent his time out of prison, traveling between states before finally landing at Tallahassee, Florida, where he committed the Chi Omega incident.
I heard about the escape on the news. I was concerned with him being loose on what was going to happen to someone else.
After failing to lure a 14-year-old, he kidnapped 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her school, raped and slit her throat.
She exited this building and walked across this basketball court. But from then on, the whereabouts of Kimberly Diane Leach is unknown to the Lake City Police Department.
He also stole a Beetle car, but was unfortunately stopped by a policeman who had no idea who Ted was for a casual vehicle stop. Bundy attempted to escape, but failed. In his possession were 3 ID cards belonging to students at Florida State University, 21 stolen credit cards, and a fake driver's license. During his arrest, he claimed he was a law student in Tallahassee. He avoided being shown on camera, placing a false birthmark on his cheek. He claimed he was Kenneth Meisner, the name of the fake driver's license. At that point, there were no photos on the driver's license, so it could not be confirmed. Ted Bundy would have been released, but unfortunately for him, the real Kenneth Meisner already reported his driver's license missing. This theft was linked to the location of the Chi Omega killing. The county sheriff, realizing how complicated everything was, began putting in pressure. He would later cave in, offering to identify himself in exchange for a phone call. He called Liz Kleffler. The police were listening and soon realized he was the infamous killer. The credit cards he used were used to track his location, putting him in the location of Chi Omega murders as well as the killing of Kim Leach. He was kept in a very secure prison. After all, he was a man who had committed over 30 murders in several states. They took him to a dentist to get his dental records, and they fit the bite marks left in the buttocks of his Chi Omega victim. 7th of July, 1978, he was indicted for murder. Trial. A year later, on the 9th of May 1979, the Ted Bundy trial was held, being the first nationally televised trial. He was charged with the Chi Omega house crimes, with Judge Edward Cowart overseeing the trial. Michael Minerva, who is Bundy's public defender, advised Bundy to quietly sit down, staying quiet till the whole trial had passed. He was to try his best not to direct attention to himself, to avoid the death penalty. In the worst-case scenario, he would get a 75-year sentence. Ted had agreed, but did the exact opposite. Ted suddenly stood up, claiming his innocence, saying his counsel was ineffective. This sabotaged his plea deal, which would help him avoid the death penalty. It was settled that it would be a trial by farce, meaning Ted Bundy would defend himself, but his public defenders would stay on as counsels. Ned Neary, who saw Ted Bundy running out, was brought to the stand. Robert Haggard, one of Bundy's defense attorneys, had cast doubts on the jury's minds. He said it was dark and only for a few seconds, making it impossible to tell if it was Ted Bundy she had seen that night. In that second, Ted Bundy stood up, threatening to fire his defense team. Haggard soon walked out of the courtroom, annoyed at how Ted kept destroying his defense. Dr. Richard Suviron, a forensic deontologist, testified that Ted Bundy's dental records matched the bite marks found in the buttocks of his victim, claiming they were like fingerprints. It was a new approach at the time. In reality, it was not entirely accurate, but the jury had bought it, and Ted Bundy could not think of a way to refute it. Everyone had heard of Ted Bundy. He had become somewhat of a celebrity. From hebristophilia to obsession, a lot of women tried to slip him notes, offering themselves for sex and even asking for marriage. Others were assured of his innocence, proclaiming it loudly to journalists. Carol Ann Boone, who was in love with Bundy, had called him innocent and talked to the media on his behalf. On the 24th of July, 1979, Ted Bundy delivered his closing argument. 6.5 hours later, the jury had found him guilty of the murder of Margaret Bowen and Lisa Levy. He was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. On the 1st of January 1980, Ted Bundy was charged with the murder of 12-year-old Kim Leach. There was a backup plan that if the first death penalty did not work out, that the second would seal the deal. Witnesses had seen him take her in a white van. The bloodstain in the van was later found to match Kim's, and the semen in her underwear matched Ted's. Furthermore, carpet fiber from the van was found on her body. On February 6, 1980, he was convicted for the murder of Kim Leach. With his second trial, he had secured a second death penalty. Psychological evaluation. Ted Bundy was a sadist, rapist, kleptomaniac, and chronic liar. He was extremely cold and calculating when planning his kidnappings. He used alcohol when committing most of his crimes, but would soon later commit them sober. He would maintain a regular life to cover up his tracks. At first, he would only kidnap for sexual satisfaction from rape, and first only killing to cover up his crimes, but soon began enjoying killing even without penetration, like in the Chi Omega murders. He was a congenital psychopath and felt no remorse for all his crimes. He would say that it was necessary to commit such crimes to satisfy his hunger. He concluded he was good at what he did.
Yourself, or you're going to get another attorney?
I'm staying with the man I know best right now, and that's me.
And this fed his narcissism. He left no fingerprints on crime scenes. He would travel between states picking victims and would dump bodies in remote areas, burning their belongings. Soon enough, he could not control his hunger, and the break between each kill grew less and less. Death row and death. Ted Bundy was on death row for 10 years. He would file different appeals to avoid the death penalty. He soon fell into drugs and alcohol, which Carol would help him smuggle in through her vagina. He managed to bribe guards to allow him to have sex with Carol. She soon became pregnant, and they had a daughter in 1982, whom she called Rosa. She formed her family with Ted Bundy and her children, still vouching for his innocence. Ted Bundy would talk to the FBI profilers and would help them solve crimes. In July 1984, he made his last known and unsuccessful attempt to escape prison by sawing the steel bars in his cell. He got 2 stays of execution, even confessing to a majority of his crimes to get stays of execution, but it did nothing to avoid his death sentence. 5 a.m., January 24th, 1989, he had his last meal of steak and eggs. His last words were about how serial killers were everywhere. At 7 a.m., he was put into the death chamber and electrocuted. He died at 7:16 a.m. while calling out the names of his victims. His execution was celebrated all over the country. Ted Bundy was never charged with the majority of his crimes, and it was estimated that he had almost 100 victims. Not all of his victims were identified, and for others, it couldn't be definite that he was the culprit. He served as inspiration for several movies, including Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs, American Psycho, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, among others. Till now, he still has fangirls who eulogize the despicable Ted Bundy. As we close this chapter on the case of Ted Bundy, we're left both haunted and enlightened by the grim complexities of human nature. Bundy's life and crimes are a chilling reminder that evil can often wear a mask of charm and normalcy lurking amongst us.
Press. Contrary to Section 78204 Florida statute.
I'll plead not guilty right now.
And your grand jurors being present in state court.
He's entertaining, he's got a good sense of humor, but he's also very devious, he's a mean son of a gun. The man's a wimp. I mean, people that sneak up on women and kill them, and what else can you say?
But in agreement with the advisory sentence rendered by the jury, it is hereby imposed the death penalty upon the defendant Theodore Robert Bundy. It's a tragedy for this court to see it's such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. If you made a good lawyer, I'd love to have you practice in front of me. But you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself.
You don't understand. Even when you hear the details, you can't comprehend it as being a 12-year-old and this is your classmate who was just innocent.
Did anyone know the real Ted? Was he just an evil genius, as the Ted Bundy myth eventually became? Or was there something wrong? Was he not in complete control?